The night grew colder. The street lamps flickered weakly. At last, I stood before the door, trembling, not from the weather, but from fear. My hand lifted, hovered, and then knocked. And in that fragile moment, I whispered the only question that mattered. Would he even know my name? So I'll ask you, what do you do when the very people who should protect you become your greatest source of pain? And what do you do when, in the ashes of that pain, destiny offers you one last gift you never expected? I used to believe that the hardest part of life was behind me. I had raised 2 children, buried a husband, worked jobs that left my back aching and my hands calloused. Surely, I told myself, the autumn years were meant to be softer. Surely they were meant to be filled with warmth, rest, and the love of the very children I had carried through storms. But life has a cruel way of keeping its surprises until the end. In those days before the airport, my life followed a rhythm. My mornings began before the sun stretched its fingers across the horizon. I'd shuffle to the kitchen in my slippers, boil water for tea, and stare out the window as the city woke around me. I lived in a modest apartment complex. Daniel and Clara helped me move there after I sold the family home. "It's too much house for you, Mom," Daniel had said, already pulling out numbers and figures, as though I were a burden to be calculated on paper. At the time, I didn't see it that way. I told myself they cared. I told myself this was love. The apartment wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, a leaky faucet that whined like a child in the night, but it was mine. I kept it spotless. I ironed my curtains, polished my floor, and kept my rocking chair by the window just so. From that chair, I watched buses groan down the street, children rushing to school, young couples holding hands, heads tilted together like secrets shared only between them. And me? My secret was silence. I busied myself with little things, crocheting scarves no one wore, baking pies that rarely found their way beyond my own table, watering the stubborn little plant that refused to die no matter how many times I forgot it. Once a week, I volunteered at the church pantry. The younger women called me Mother Evelyn, and though their problems were not mine, their voices filled the hollow places of my heart. I gave advice no one followed, hugs some didn't want, and prayers that I hoped someone heard. But always, in the quiet of evening, it was my children I thought of. Daniel, my firstborn. Clara, my last. They were my reason, my anchor. Even when visits grew shorter, even when their eyes slid past mine as though searching for escape, I told myself it was the busyness of life. They had jobs. They had lives. Didn't I raise them for exactly that? To be independent, to stand on their own 2 feet? Yet, a part of me longed for the simplicity of their childhoods, for the scraped knees I kissed better, for the nights I stood over their beds, whispering prayers of protection into the dark, for the mornings when tiny hands tugged at my apron and voices asked, "Mama, what's for breakfast?" Now, when they visited, their voices were different. Daniel's was brisk, filled with the clipped efficiency of a man who measured time in dollars. Clara's was rushed, fluttering between texts and calls, her eyes always darting, never resting on me for long. They brought groceries sometimes, other times excuses. Still, I smiled, Still, I thanked them. Still, I told myself this was enough. But late at night, when I sat in my chair with the television murmuring in the background, I wondered, was I holding on to love that had already let me go? The photographs on my shelf answered differently. Daniel as a boy, his hair sticking up in every direction, grinning with a missing tooth. Clara as a girl, clutching a ragged doll to her chest like it was treasure. My late husband, strong and proud, with one arm draped around me, the other resting protectively on Daniel's shoulder. We looked happy in that picture. Or maybe we just looked determined. Sometimes survival wears the same mask as joy. It was in those quiet moments that another face would come to me. Not my husband's, not my children's. A different face, younger, softer, framed by the wild curls of youth. Michael Turner, my first love. It startled me sometimes, the way his memory lingered after all these years, a ghost that visited in the stillness. I'd remember his laughter, the way he'd hold wildflowers behind his back before pressing them into my hand. We were young then, foolish and untamed, dreaming of running away to places neither of us had ever seen. But duty pulled us apart. Family expectations, responsibilities, life. I married someone else. He did too, I suppose. Yet sometimes, late at night, I wondered, did he ever think of me? Was he even alive? But those were daydreams. Real life was Daniel and Clara, the only anchor I had left. So when they told me about the trip, I nearly cried with joy. "We'll take you somewhere nice, Mom," Clara said, hugging me quickly, her perfume sharp and foreign to my nose. "You deserve a break. Pack a bag, we'll handle the rest." I believed her. Of course I did. Why wouldn't I? For days I prepared. I folded my best dress, the lilac one, even though I rarely wore it. I slipped the scarf Michael once gave me into the suitcase, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe for luck, maybe for memory. And I tucked a small envelope of savings into my purse, money I had scraped together, dollar by dollar, denying myself little pleasures so I would never have to beg. As I zipped the suitcase, I whispered to myself, "This is it. This is the start of something new." Because what else was there to believe? That my children had grown tired of me? That I was an obligation they carried like a heavy stone? No, I told myself love was still there. It had to be. Was I blind, or did I simply choose blindness? Because hope was easier than truth. That night, I went to bed with the suitcase by my door, my heart swelling with fragile hope. I dreamed of laughter, of togetherness, of love rekindled in the simplest ways. And yet, even in that dream, a shadow lingered, a whisper that asked, "But what if you are wrong, Evelyn? What if the ones you trust most are the ones who will break you?" Whispers. People say motherhood is a gift. They say it's the greatest blessing a woman can hold. And maybe that's true. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes blessings come wrapped in barbed wire, cutting you as you carry them. When I close my eyes, I can still see it. My younger self standing in a cramped kitchen with a baby on my hip and another tugging at my skirt. Daniel was 4 then, already restless, full of questions I didn't always have the answers to. Clara was barely a year old, her cries splitting the night like glass shattering on the floor. Her father was already fading by then, slipping into long absences and longer silences. He worked when he wanted, drank when he pleased, and when the pressure of bills and mouths to feed became too much, it was me left to pick up the pieces. I remember nights I lay awake listening for his footsteps, praying he'd come home steady enough not to wake the children with his temper. Some nights he didn't come home at all. So I learned to survive without him. I took on double shifts at the diner, scrubbing dishes until my fingers bled raw, then running plates with a smile stretched so tight it barely felt like mine. At night, when I got home, I'd wash the grease out of my hair, press Daniel's school uniform, rock Clara until her tiny fists unclenched in sleep. I barely slept myself. I lived in the in-between, half exhausted, half determined. There were times I went hungry so they wouldn't, times I wrapped leftover bread in a napkin, telling them it was a treat while my own stomach growled in protest. I remember Daniel's face once, smeared with jelly from a sandwich I could barely afford, looking up at me with those wide eyes and saying, "Mama, you're the best." Do you know how much those words can keep a woman alive? Clara was softer, gentler, always curling against me like she wanted to be part of my heartbeat. I would hum to her while folding laundry, my voice trembling but steady enough to calm her. Sometimes, when both of them were finally asleep, I'd stand by their beds and just watch them breathe, whispering prayers over their small bodies, prayers that they would grow strong, that life would give them more than it ever gave me. I didn't have much, but I gave them everything. When Daniel needed money for school trips, I cleaned houses on the weekends, scrubbing floors for families who barely looked me in the eye. When Clara wanted piano lessons, I took in laundry from neighbors, pressing shirts until my back ached just so she could press keys and feel like music belonged to her. Every cent I made, every dream I had went to them. I never let them see me cry. Not when bills piled up, not when their father finally left for good, not when I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the numbers that didn't add up, wondering how I'd keep the lights on. I swallowed my tears and smiled instead, because mothers don't get the luxury of breaking. Years blurred together. One day, I woke up and Daniel was taller than me. Clara's voice had grown into a woman's. I thought my sacrifices had borne fruit. Daniel went off to college. Clara followed a few years later. I stood in the empty house, proud and hollow at the same time, telling myself this was what I worked for, their independence, their chance at a life unburdened. And they did have those lives. Daniel found a career that kept him too busy to call. Clara moved to the city, her visits dwindling into rare appearances marked by expensive perfume and hurried hugs. But whenever I needed them, when the roof leaked, when I caught the flu, when loneliness pressed in so heavy I could barely breathe, they were never quite there. And yet, I told myself this was love. I convinced myself their absence was a sign of their success, not their neglect. Mothers are good at lying to themselves that way. Sometimes I would sit with my old photo albums, running my fingers over their faces frozen in time. Daniel with scraped knees and a wide grin, Clara in a paper crown from her birthday party, and me, always behind them, the one holding the cake, the one tying the shoelaces, the one unseen. I wondered then, do children remember the nights you stayed awake by their sickbed, wiping their foreheads with cool cloths? Do they remember the times you went without so they could have more? Or does it all vanish, like smoke, once they are grown and the world claims them? Perhaps I already knew the answer. Perhaps I just didn't want to face it. So when they told me about the trip, I clung to it like a drowning woman clings to driftwood. A family vacation, Mom! Just the three of us! You'll finally get some rest. Rest. The word sounded like heaven. I packed my suitcase with trembling hands, choosing carefully, almost reverently, my best dress, a scarf from long ago, an envelope of savings I thought might be useful. I even bought a new tube of lipstick, the first in years, and when I tried it on, I hardly recognized the woman in the mirror. For a brief, fleeting moment, she looked hopeful again. And yet, somewhere in the shadows of my heart, unease stirred. Daniel's clipped voice, Clara's distracted eyes, the way they rushed through their words when they told me. I brushed it away. They're just busy, I told myself. They love me, even if they don't always show it. But late at night, lying in bed with my packed suitcase by the door, another thought crept in. What if I was wrong? Stay with me now. Love, it's a strange thing, isn't it? You spend your whole life giving it away, pouring it into others until your hands are empty. And you convince yourself that when you are old, it will return to you, like water circling back to the well, like a harvest after planting in the fields for decades. But sometimes the fields stay barren. Sometimes the well runs dry. And yet we still drink from the dust, pretending it's enough. That's what I did with Daniel and Clara. There were moments, small, fleeting ones, when I told myself that they loved me as deeply as I loved them. Daniel stopping by with groceries once every month or two. Clara dropping off flowers she probably bought at the gas station on her way over. They were brief visits, rushed and distracted, but I clung to them like a starving woman clings to crumbs. I remember once Daniel brought me a new toaster. He set it on the counter without much ceremony, saying, "Yours looked old, Mom. Figured you could use an upgrade." I thanked him over and over, touched by the gesture. That night, I made myself toast for dinner, just to use it, sitting at the kitchen table, smiling like I'd been giving gold. But later, as I scrubbed the crumbs off the counter, a thought crept in. Daniel hadn't stayed for the meal. He dropped off the toaster, took a call, and left. I had eaten my toast alone. Still, I convinced myself this was love. Clara was no different. She once surprised me with a scarf, a beautiful shade of green, soft against my cheek. I wore it to church the next Sunday, proud as a peacock. When the other ladies admired it, I said, "My daughter bought it for me." My heart swelled with pride. But when Clara came by later that week, I thanked her again, and she barely remembered. "Oh, right," she said distractedly. "I saw it on sale." A sale. I told myself the price didn't matter. What mattered was that she thought of me. But as the months went on, I realized it wasn't really me she thought of. It was her own sense of duty. A checkbox to tick off, a quick task between meetings and dinners. But I swallowed those doubts, buried them deep, because the alternative, that my children didn't really love me the way I had loved them, was unbearable. Have you ever lied to yourself so well that you almost believed it? There were family gatherings too, though fewer and fewer each year. Birthdays, holidays, rush dinners where they sat across from me scrolling on their phones, nodding absently to my stories. Sometimes I'd pause mid-sentence, testing to see if they were even listening. Their eyes never lifted. But when they left, they'd hug me, quick, perfunctory, and I'd hold on to that warmth like it was proof that love was still there, hiding under the busyness, waiting to bloom again if only I had patience. I told myself, "They love you, Evelyn. They're just tired. They're just busy. This is what adulthood looks like." But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, I knew better. One evening, I invited Daniel over for dinner. I cooked his favorite, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, even apple pie for dessert. I set the table with the good plates, the ones that hadn't seen daylight since the children were small. Listen to what I'm about to say to you. So,
He came, but he came late. He ate quickly, checked his watch, and left before dessert. The pie sat untouched on the counter until I wrapped it in foil and froze it. Weeks later, I found it still sitting there, hard as a stone, and I cried as I threw it away. Was that love, or was it habit? Clara, too, had her moments. Once she called me late at night, her voice trembling. She'd broken up with a man, she said, and she didn't know who else to call. I listened for hours, offering comfort, the way mothers do, and at the end, she sighed, "Thanks, Mom. You're always there for me." My heart swelled at the words, but weeks passed before she called again, not to check on me, not to ask how I was sleeping in the silence of my little apartment, only when she needed something. And still, I convinced myself this was love. Because what was the alternative? To admit that I had spent my life giving everything and perhaps received nothing in return? To face the possibility that my children, my blood, saw me not as their mother, but as a duty they endured? No, I couldn't face that. So I built illusions. I took scraps of attention and sewed them into a quilt, wrapping myself in it to stay warm. I replayed kind words that were spoken in haste, stretching them into lullabies for my lonely nights. Perhaps I was foolish, perhaps I was desperate. But tell me, what else was I supposed to do? Loneliness is a hungry beast. It makes you swallow lies, makes you cling to ghosts. It convinces you that the faintest flicker of kindness is a roaring flame. Stay with me now. Oh, dear. That's what kept me going in the weeks before the trip. Daniel's rushed smile, Clara's distracted hug. I told myself, they're planning something special for you. They see you, Evelyn. They still love you. But love, true love, isn't distracted. It isn't rushed. It doesn't forget. I just didn't want to see it. So when they announced the family trip, my heart soared higher than it had in years. I clung to it, to the idea of laughter and togetherness as proof that all my sacrifices hadn't been in vain. I believed. But belief, I've learned, is not the same as truth. Not every love leaves a scar. Some leave a shadow instead, soft, lingering, following you quietly no matter where life takes you. For me, that shadow was Michael Turner. We were young when we met, 17, maybe 18. Back then, the world still felt wide open, like it was waiting for us to run across it. I remember the first time I saw him. It was at the corner store near my mother's house. He held the door open for me, clumsy and awkward, his curls bouncing as he ducked his head. His smile was shy, but his eyes were steady. They held me, even when I pretended not to notice. I remember thinking, here is someone who sees me, not as a daughter tied to chores, not as a girl expected to marry quickly and settle down, but as me, Evelyn. It started with small things. He'd walk me home from school, carrying my books, even though I told him I could manage. He'd leave wildflowers on the stoop, tied with string because the ribbon was too fancy for him. We'd sit on the porch at night, listening to the crickets, our knees brushing, and though we hardly touched, my heart raced like we had crossed forbidden lines. We talked about everything, dreams, fears, the kind of life we wanted. Daniel wanted to see the world, to build something with his own hands, to live free of the small-town whispers that always seemed to hem us in. I wanted to be seen, to be loved without condition. And for a little while, I had that. There's a particular summer I can never forget. Long evenings painted gold, laughter spilling like water as we ran down dirt roads barefoot, daring the sun to catch us. He kissed me once by the river, his hands trembling like he couldn't believe he was allowed. I kissed him back, not with hesitation, but with certainty. I thought we would last forever. But life is not kind to young love. My mother disapproved. Michael's family didn't have money, didn't have standing. She said, "You need stability, Evelyn, not a boy with empty pockets and big dreams." And when my father died suddenly that fall, duty wrapped its chains around me. I had younger siblings to care for, a grieving mother, responsibilities that left no room for wildflowers and stolen kisses. Michael begged me not to let go. He said, "We'll find a way. I'll work. I'll prove myself. Just don't walk away." But I did. I walked away, tears blurring my vision, my heart shattering as I told him goodbye. I chose responsibility over love, stability over freedom. And though I built a family, though I poured myself into Daniel and Clara, a part of me never stopped wondering what might have been. Years passed. I married. I buried my dreams. I raised children. Michael became a ghost, appearing in my thoughts late at night, in the stillness after the day's work was done. Sometimes I'd imagine what his life looked like. Did he marry? Did he have children? Did he think of me the way I thought of him? I never told Daniel or Clara about him. How could I? To them, I was only ever mom, the provider, the caretaker, the one who made sure food was on the table and bills were paid. My past wasn't their concern. My heart wasn't theirs to ask about. And so, Michael became my secret. But secrets have weight. Sometimes when Clara complained about how I didn't understand her modern life, or Daniel rolled his eyes at my advice, I think back to Michael and wonder, would he have dismissed me like this? Would he have forgotten my sacrifices so easily? I doubted it, because Michael never looked at me like I was a burden. He looked at me like I was the sun. Strange, isn't it, how the memory of someone can outlast the reality of entire decades? There were nights I'd take out the scarf he gave me, the one with faded blue threads, and hold it against my cheek. It smelled of dust now, old fabric, long stored away, but in my mind, I could still feel his hands tying it around my neck that winter evening, his voice teasing, "Now you'll always be warm, even when I'm not there." He kept his promise, in a way. That scarf followed me through every chapter of my life. I wore it when I went into labor with Clara, when I buried my husband, when I moved into the apartment Daniel insisted on. It was more than cloth. It was a reminder that once I had been chosen, adored, seen. I didn't know then that destiny still had plans for me, that Michael's shadow was not just memory, but foreshadowing, that love, once planted, never truly dies. But I'll tell you this, in those quiet nights before the betrayal, when loneliness pressed hardest against my chest, it was Michael I thought of. Not Daniel, not Clara, not even my late husband. It was always him. There's a certain kind of joy that sneaks up on you in old age. It doesn't come loud, not like it does in youth. It doesn't roar. It doesn't sweep you off your feet. It comes quietly, like in soft bursts, like sunlight slipping through cracked curtains. That's what the idea of the trip felt like to me. When Daniel and Clara told me about it, I almost didn't believe them at first. "A family vacation, Mom," Clara said, her voice wrapped in a thin smile, though her eyes stayed glued to her phone. Daniel added, "It'll be good for you, fresh air, a change of scenery." His tone was clipped, businesslike, but I didn't care. My children were planning something for me, something that sounded like love. For days I floated on that thought. I told the ladies at church. I told my neighbor down the hall. I said, "My children are taking me on a trip." And they smiled, patted my hand, and said, "How wonderful. You deserve it." Did I deserve it? After years of double shifts, after nights spent alone while my husband slipped further and further from me, after pouring every ounce of myself into Daniel and Clara, did I truly deserve this little slice of happiness? I thought so. I began to prepare, carefully, reverently. I took out my best dress, the lilac one, faded but still lovely. I pressed it until the fabric shone. I polished my shoes until they looked almost new. I even bought a tube of lipstick, the first in years, a soft pink that made me feel like the woman I used to be, not just the mother or the widow or the burden. I packed slowly, savoring the process. Each item I folded into the suitcase felt like a promise. The scarf Michael gave me went in too, though I couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was memory. Perhaps it was hope. Perhaps it was something deeper I didn't dare name. And then there was the envelope of money. I had saved quietly, month after month, denying myself little things, an extra pastry at the bakery, a new pair of shoes when the old ones wore thin. It wasn't much, but it was mine, my safety net. I tucked it into my purse, just in case. The night before, I set the suitcase by the door. I sat in my rocking chair, staring at it, my heart swelling with a kind of fragile joy. I pictured us laughing together, eating together, maybe even walking by the ocean. The sound of waves softening the years of silence that had grown between us. Oh, if I knew better. Stay with me now. Oh. I wanted to believe this trip was more than just a vacation. I wanted to believe it was a chance to mend what had frayed, to remind Daniel and Clara that family isn't measured in duty, but in love. But even as I dreamed, small doubts whispered at the edges of my mind. Daniel's clipped voice when he told me. Clara's hurried tone, her eyes darting. The way they seemed more focused on logistics than on me. I brushed the doubts away. Don't ruin this for yourself, Evelyn, I thought. They're trying. This is their way of showing love. The morning of the trip, I woke before dawn. I dressed carefully, pinned my hair, applied the new lipstick. I wanted to look nice for my children, wanted to remind them that I was still their mother, still the woman who had once carried them on her hip and kissed their scraped knees. When Daniel knocked, I opened the door with a smile so wide it made my cheeks ache. He barely noticed. He picked up the suitcase with a grunt, muttering about time. Clara breezed in behind him, her perfume sharp, her eyes already on her phone. "Ready, Mom?" she asked, barely glancing up. "Yes," I said softly, my heart leaping despite their distraction. "I've been ready." In the car, I'd tried to talk. I asked where we were going, what the trip would be like. Their answers were vague, distracted.
Clara scrolled through her phone. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. But still, I smiled. Still, I convinced myself this was love. When the airport came into view, my heart swelled with excitement. I pressed my hands together, whispered a prayer of gratitude. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for giving me this moment. I didn't know then that gratitude would soon turn to grief. I didn't know then that the suitcase by my feet wasn't packed for joy, but for betrayal. I didn't know then that the children I loved with every piece of my being would leave me in that airport alone, with nothing. But looking back, maybe I should have known. Maybe the truth was always there, waiting for me to stop lying to myself. Airports are strange places, aren't they? Everyone rushing, everyone holding on to tickets and dreams, everyone trying to get somewhere. For me that day, it felt like the whole world was in motion, everyone except me. When we pulled up, my heart beat like a drum in my chest. Daniel was tense at the wheel, Clara tapping on her phone, her screen glowing against her distracted face. But me? I was glowing too, from the inside out. This was my trip, my reward, my children's gift to me. Ready, Mom? She asked, barely glancing up. Yes, I said softly, my heart leaping despite their distraction. I've been ready. In the car, I tried to talk. I asked where we were going, what the trip would be like. Their answers were vague, distracted. Clara scrolled through her phone. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. But still, I smiled. Still, I convinced myself this was love. As the airport came into view, my heart swelled with excitement. I pressed my hands together, whispered a prayer of gratitude. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for giving me this moment. I didn't know then that gratitude would soon turn to grief. I didn't know then that the suitcase by my feet wasn't packed for joy, but for betrayal. I didn't know then that the children I loved with every piece of my being would leave me in that airport alone, with nothing. But looking back, maybe I should have known. Maybe the truth was always there, waiting for me to stop lying to myself. Airports are strange places, aren't they? Everyone rushing, everyone holding on to tickets and dreams, everyone trying to get somewhere. For me that day, it felt like the whole world was in motion, everyone except me. When we pulled up, my heart beat like a drum in my chest. Daniel was tense at the wheel, Clara tapping on her phone, her screen glowing against her distracted face. But me? I was glowing too, from the inside out. This was my trip, my reward, my children's gift to me. Here we are, Daniel muttered, pulling into the drop-off lane. He popped the trunk without looking at me. I glanced at him, then at Clara, waiting for more, waiting for some smiles, some word of reassurance. But she just sighed, checking her reflection in her phone camera. Go on inside, Mom, she said, finally glancing at me. We'll catch up. Catch up? The words didn't quite make sense, but I didn't question them. I smiled, nodded, gathered my purse and suitcase. My lilac dress felt stiff in the winter air, but I straightened my shoulders, clutching the handle of the suitcase with trembling hands. I turned back toward the car, ready to say thank you again. Thank you for thinking of me, for loving me enough to give me this gift. But the car was already pulling away. At first I thought they were parking. Surely they wouldn't just leave me here. Surely they'd circle back. So I waited. I stood there by the sliding glass doors, people rushing past with their luggage, families chattering, children tugging at their parents' sleeves. I waited as the cold wind whipped through the lane, as the minutes ticked by. 5 minutes? 10? 15? No car. No Daniel. No Clara.
I tried to call, my fingers fumbling with the phone. Daniel's line went straight to voicemail. Clara's rang twice. Then silence. I left messages, my voice shaky. Where are you? I'm at the entrance. Did you park? Still, I told myself not to panic. Not yet. They wouldn't leave me. Not them. Not my children. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, reality seeped in like ice water. My hands grew numb around the handle of the suitcase. My lipstick, so carefully applied that morning, felt heavy on my lips. People glanced at me as they passed, some with pity, some with irritation, like I was in the way. And that's when it hit me. They weren't coming back. The suitcase slid from my hand, thudding against the curb. I staggered to the nearest bench and sat down hard, my heart hammering, my mind spinning. My children, my babies, the ones I had worked and bled and sacrificed for, had left me here, alone, with nothing. Why? Why would they do this? Hadn't I given enough? Hadn't I poured every ounce of my life into theirs? The double shifts, the hunger, the tears I never let them see? Wasn't it enough? I opened my purse with shaking hands, searching for answers that weren't there. My savings envelope was gone, vanished. My heart sunk as the truth tightened around me. They hadn't abandoned me. They had robbed me. Tears blurred my vision as I sat there in the chaos of the airport, people rushing past as though I were invisible. Mothers herded their children, couples clutched hands, announcements crackled overhead, and me? I was just a woman on a bench, holding nothing but betrayal. The humiliation stung worse than the cold. I could almost hear Daniel's voice in my head, brisk and detached. "It's too much house for you, Mom." Clara's rushed excuses, her distracted hugs. Had it all been leading to this? Were they always planning to cut me loose like baggage too heavy to carry? My breath came fast, shallow, my chest tightening. I tried to stand, but my legs wobbled. I sat back down, clutching my scarf, the one that Michael had given me all those years ago. For some reason, it was the only thing that steadied me. But steadiness wasn't enough. Not here. Not now. I felt panic pressing in, pressing hard. Where would I go? How would I survive? My rent was unpaid, my savings stolen, my children gone. And the question that cut the deepest? Was I nothing to them? After all these years, all these sacrifices, was I nothing but a burden to be discarded? I sat there until the crowds thinned, until the announcements echoed through nearly empty halls. My tears dried into salt on my cheeks, but the ache in my chest remained, heavy and sharp. I thought of the nights I had worked until my body broke, the meals I skipped so they could eat, the lullabies I whispered while fighting exhaustion. I thought of Daniel's first steps, Clara's first words. Did they remember those moments? Did they matter at all? Or had I been blind all along, mistaking scraps for love, illusions for truth? The airport buzzed around me, alive with strangers chasing their destinations. But me? I had no destination. Only a suitcase, an empty purse, and a heart cracked wide open. And in that emptiness, a new feeling stirred. Not hope, not despair, something darker, sharper. Anger. Because love may bend, but betrayal burns. And sitting there on that cold bench, abandoned and humiliated, I vowed silently, this was not how my story would end. Do you know what silence feels like in a crowded place? It's strange. It's as if the noise of the world keeps roaring on, but inside you, everything is muted, blunted, hollow. That's how it felt sitting there in the terminal. Planes rumbled down runways, children cried, suitcases rattled across the tiled floor, announcements called out flight numbers. Yet, all of it seemed far away, like I was listening from underwater. Inside, there was only one sound, the shattering echo of betrayal. I clutched the handle of my suitcase, though my hands shook so badly it rattled against the floor. My purse felt too light without the envelope of money. My body felt too heavy with the weight of what Daniel and Clara had done. At first, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe they were delayed. Maybe they were testing me, cruel as it sounded, just to see what I would do. Maybe they'd come running back any second, laughing awkwardly, saying, "Sorry, Mom, mix up with the tickets. Let's go." But the minutes stretched into hours, and no one came. So the reasoning crumbled. Then came the sorrow. It rose like a tide, choking me. Tears spilled again, hot and unrelenting. I tried to hide my face, pressing it into my scarf, but people still stared. A woman passed by, her little boy tugging at her hand, and I overheard him whisper, "Why is that lady crying, Mommy?" Why, indeed. How could I explain it? That my own children, my blood, had abandoned me as if I were nothing, that they had stolen from me, not just money, but dignity, safety, love. I thought of every sleepless night spent working, every shift I dragged myself through on aching feet, every birthday cake I scraped together when I had nothing left. Had it all been for this? The sorrow twisted into guilt. That's how it felt sitting there in the terminal. Planes rumbled down runways, children cried, suitcases rattled across the tiled floor, announcements called out flight numbers. Yet, all of it seemed far away, like I was listening from underwater. Inside, there was only one sound, the shattering echo of betrayal. I clutched the handle of my suitcase, though my hands shook so badly it rattled against the floor. My purse felt too light without the envelope of money. My body felt too heavy with the weight of what Daniel and Clara had done. At first, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe they were delayed. Maybe they were testing me, cruel as it sounded, just to see what I would do. Maybe they'd come running back any second, laughing awkwardly, saying, "Sorry, Mom, mix up with the tickets. Let's go." But the minutes stretched into hours, and no one came. So the reasoning crumbled. Then came the sorrow. It rose like a tide, choking me. Tears spilled again, hot and unrelenting. I tried to hide my face, pressing it into my scarf, but people still stared. A woman passed by, her little boy tugging at her hand, and I overheard him whisper, "Why is that lady crying, Mommy?" Why, indeed. How could I explain it? That my own children, my blood, had abandoned me as if I were nothing, that they had stolen from me, not just money, but dignity, safety, love. I thought of every sleepless night spent working, every shift I dragged myself through on aching feet, every birthday cake I scraped together when I had nothing left. Had it all been for this? The sorrow twisted into guilt. What did I do wrong? Did I smother them too much? Did I not give them enough? Did I raise them to be selfish, or did I raise them so selflessly that they never learned to give back? Questions, endless questions, each one cutting deeper. And then, like a storm changing direction, the sorrow shifted. It hardened. It turned into something else. Anger. It started as a whisper, a small ember glowing in my chest. But the more I thought, the more it grew. Listen to what I'm about to say to you, oh dear. So, I remember Daniel sitting at the kitchen table with homework while I cooked after double shifts. I remembered Clara curled against me, whimpering from a fever, and me holding her all night so she wouldn't cry. I remembered selling my wedding ring just to buy them new shoes when their feet had grown too fast. And now, this? They hadn't just left me, they had humiliated me. They had treated me like a piece of baggage, discarded when it became inconvenient to carry. The ember flared hotter. I straightened on the bench, wiping the tears from my cheeks with shaking hands. Around me, the airport carried on, indifferent. But inside, something was shifting. I was done begging for their love, done making excuses for their neglect, done pretending scraps were enough. Because what they had done, leaving me there, stripping me of money, dignity, and safety, wasn't just unkind. It was unforgivable. And unforgivable acts demand reckoning. For years, I had silenced my anger. I had buried it beneath responsibility, beneath sacrifice, beneath the illusions of love I stitched together like broken quilts. But now it clawed its way out, raw and alive. I began to see clearly the little signs I had ignored for so long, the way Daniel avoided my eyes when he left quickly after visits, the way Clara's voice carried impatience even when she tried to sound affectionate. I had told myself it was love disguised as busyness, but no, it was convenience, obligation, maybe even disdain. I was a burden to them, and in their eyes, discarding me was easier than carrying me forward. The realization hurt like nothing else, but it also sharpened me. Because here's the truth, I am not disposable. I am Evelyn Carter. I am the woman who scrubbed dishes until her fingers cracked, who stitched clothes until her eyesight blurred, who kept her children alive when everything else fell apart. I am the woman who gave everything, and I will not be erased. As I sat there, a strange calm washed over me, braided tightly with fury. I thought of Michael, my first love, the only man who had ever truly seen me. I wondered where he was now, if he was alive, if he ever thought of me. The memory of his steady eyes steadied me now. For the first time in years, I felt something other than despair. I felt resolve. Daniel and Clara had abandoned me, but they had also awakened something in me. Something they had underestimated. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Nightfall at an airport is lonelier than anywhere else. By then, the frantic pace of travel slows. The announcements become less frequent and the crowds thin. The benches grow colder, the lights harsher, and if you have nowhere to go, if you've been left behind, every detail cuts deeper. That was me. Hours had passed since Daniel and Clara drove away. My calls went unanswered, my messages left unread. My suitcase sat at my feet like dead weight, though lighter than ever without the envelope of money inside. My stomach gnawed with hunger, but the thought of spending even a single dollar from my nearly empty wallet felt terrifying. I looked at the food court. Families laughing over burgers, couples sipping coffee, but the sight only made the ache worse. I told myself I wasn't hungry, told myself I could wait. I'd been waiting my whole life after all. Still, the questions swarmed. Where would I sleep? How long could I stay here before someone asked me to leave? Was I destined to become one of those forgotten faces, drifting from one public space to another until I simply vanished? I gripped the scarf around my shoulders tighter, Michael's scarf, The one piece of my past that still offered warmth, even when everything else had been stripped away. It wasn't just the hunger or the exhaustion that stung. It was the humiliation. Sitting there while strangers passed, I saw the way some of them glanced at me, pitying, dismissive, curious. Did they wonder what mistake had landed me here? Did they assume I was just another elderly woman who'd lost her way? If only they knew. The struggle wasn't just physical, it was in my mind. For years, I had told myself my children loved me, that their hurried hugs, their distracted words were enough proof. Now, stripped of that illusion, the truth pressed hard against me. They had never seen me the way I had seen them. And worse, I had let them. I had allowed myself to be erased, to be small, to be convenient, but not anymore. That night, as I curled against my suitcase, pretending it was a pillow, I made myself a promise. This was not going to be my end. If I had to beg, I would beg. If I had to crawl, I would crawl. But I would not fade. The first test came when the janitor nudged me awake. His voice was rough, but not unkind. "Ma'am, you can't sleep here. You'll need to move along." Move along? Where, though? I stood, my body stiff from the hard bench. "Of course," I murmured, gathering my things, forcing dignity into my posture, even as shame burned my cheeks. I wandered the airport, dragging my suitcase, searching for a corner no one would notice. Every space seemed too exposed, too full of eyes.
Finally, I found myself in the restroom, where warmth and quiet hummed faintly. I locked myself in a stall, sat on the closed lid, and rested my head against the wall. It wasn't comfort, but it was shelter. And in that cramped stall, in the thick silence of midnight, I let myself cry again. But these tears were different. Not the helpless sobs of earlier. These were sharp, angry tears, the kind that hardened something inside you. I thought of Daniel's averted gaze, Clara's distracted tone. I thought of how easily they had cut me away from their lives. And I thought, if they see me as weak, if they see me as disposable, then I will prove them wrong. I will rise so high, they'll have no choice but to look up. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know when. But I knew this. Survival was my first revenge. Morning came harshly, with fluorescent lights glaring against my swollen eyes. I splashed water on my face, straightened my dress, and walked out of that restroom like it was a battlefield I'd survived. The hunger roared again, though. I had no choice but to face it. I reached into my wallet. 3 crumpled bills, some coins, enough for a cup of coffee and a small pastry. I carried them to the counter of a cafe, my hands trembling as I ordered. The barista handed me the items without a second glance. I carried them to a corner table, each sip and bite filling not just my stomach, but a strange sense of defiance. I am still here, I thought. Still alive. Still standing. Wasn't that something? But survival was only the beginning. That night, as I sat again with my suitcase by my side, I noticed people, different people now, lingering longer than travelers should. A man hunched near the vending machines, a woman muttering to herself near the exits, forgotten souls like me. They weren't travelers, they were survivors. And for the first time I realized I wasn't alone. But what separated us was choice. I could let this become my life, drifting invisible, or I could claw my way back to dignity, to purpose, to something more. The struggle was brutal, but with each passing hour, it carved me sharper, stronger. Daniel and Clara thought they had ended me, but really, they had awakened me. See what you would have missed if you were not here at this point? Oh, my child. Do you know the difference between sorrow and anger? Sorrow folds you in on yourself.
It makes you smaller, quieter. It bends your back, softens your voice. Anger, though, anger straightens you. It pulls you up from the ashes, forces your eyes open, forces your feet to move. That was the shift inside me in the days after the airport. I wandered through hours of hunger, nights of restless half-sleep, my body aching from benches and bathroom stalls. But beneath it all, something was changing. A fire was catching. I stopped asking, why did they do this to me? And started asking, what am I going to do about it? Daniel and Clara thought they had silenced me, thought they had erased me, but the silence they left behind became fertile ground for something else. Rage. I thought of Daniel's cold detachment, the way he dismissed me as though I were nothing but a line item in his schedule. I thought of Clara's indifference, the way her eyes slid past me, more focused on her phone than her own mother's face. The betrayal replayed over and over in my mind, sharper with each turn. They hadn't just left me, they had stolen from me. Not just money, but dignity, trust, love. They had stripped me bare. And something inside me whispered, make them pay. At first, the thought startled me. I was a mother, wasn't I? Mothers forgive. Mothers endure. Mothers carry the weight no one else will. But then another voice, stronger, clearer, rose up. Mothers are not martyrs. Mothers are human, and humans have limits. Hadn't I given enough? Hadn't I bled and sweated and cried enough? Yes. So why should I be the one to carry this betrayal quietly? Why should I bear shame for their cruelty? No. This time, the shame was theirs, and I was going to make sure they felt it. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know when, but I knew this. I would not let this betrayal define me. I would rise, not just for survival, but for justice. And as if fate had been listening, that was when the memory of Michael came rushing back, stronger than ever. Michael, with his steady eyes. Michael, who once told me I was more than the roles the world tried to shove me into. Michael, who had loved me before I learned how cruel life could be. I clutched the scarf he had given me, the faded threads brushing against my fingers, and felt him there with me, whispering through the years, "You are still you. You are still powerful. Don't forget." The scarf wasn't just fabric anymore. It was a reminder, a weapon even, proof that once I was loved deeply, fiercely, and that I could be seen again. I wondered where he was, if he was still alive, if life had been kind to him, or if he too had been broken by betrayal. Part of me longed to find him, to see if his eyes still carried that same steady fire. And another part of me whispered that maybe destiny wasn't finished with us yet. But first, Daniel and Clara. The thought of them no longer made me weep. It made me stand taller. It made me rehearse words in my mind, words I would one day say to their faces. I am not the woman you thought you could throw away. I am more, and you will regret underestimating me. Each day at the airport, I practiced resilience like it was training. I rationed my coins carefully. I learned the rhythms of the place. When the guards looked the other way, when I could linger unnoticed, I grew stronger, harder. And with each passing day, the vision of revenge sharpened. I didn't want to hurt them physically. No, that wasn't my way. I wanted something deeper. I wanted them to feel exposed, humiliated, stripped of the illusions they clung to. I wanted them to look at me and see not a burden, but a reckoning. Isn't that what betrayal deserves? Not silence, not forgiveness, reckoning. The old Evelyn, the one who folded herself into smaller spaces, who waited quietly for scraps of affection, was gone. In her place was someone new, someone they had created with their cruelty. And I'll tell you this, the woman they had created was not afraid. Not of hunger, not of loneliness, not of them.
Because once you've been left with nothing, what else is there to fear? I lifted my head higher. My steps grew firmer, my eyes sharper. The people around me began to look at me differently, as though they sensed the change, though they couldn't name it. That's the thing about transformation. It shows before you even speak. And though I didn't yet know how, I knew this with absolute certainty. Daniel and Clara would see me again, and when they did, they would not recognize the woman standing before them. The first step after betrayal is always the hardest. Not the crying, not the aching, not even the anger. No, the hardest step is moving, rising from the bench, gathering what's left of you, choosing to act. And that was the choice before me. I had spent days at the airport, hovering between despair and fury, between invisibility and awakening. The scarf around my neck carried Michael's memory like a lantern in the dark. But lanterns only glow so far. Eventually, you have to walk into the shadows yourself. I couldn't stay here forever. The airport, with its hollow announcements and restless crowds, was no place to rebuild. It was only a reminder of what had been taken. And I wanted more than reminders. I wanted reclamation. So I stood. I thought of Clara's indifference, Daniel's clipped voice. I thought of the years I had given them, the dreams I had shelved, the love I had poured. And then I thought of Michael, my first love, the only one who had ever made me feel like Evelyn, not just Mom. Where was he now? Was he alive? Did he remember me? The thought wouldn't let go. It circled in my mind like a song I couldn't silence, and with each turn, it grew louder, more insistent. Maybe the first step forward wasn't about Daniel and Clara at all. Maybe it was about me, about reclaiming the parts of myself I had lost long before they abandoned me. So, I made a choice. I would find him. It sounded foolish, even impossible. But wasn't survival always about chasing the impossible? I didn't know if Michael was still in the city or if life had scattered him like it had scattered me. But I knew this. I couldn't walk backwards, only forward. And Michael represented forward not because I wanted to live in the past, but because he had once shown me a glimpse of a future I'd never taken. Maybe destiny was offering me another chance. The bus rattled on, and I pressed my forehead against the glass, watching the city blur by. For the first time since the airport, my tears didn't feel like defeat. They felt like release. Was I still broken? Yes. Was I still betrayed? Yes. But I was moving. One step, then another. The struggle wasn't over. Hunger still gnawed. Fear still whispered. Anger still simmered. But beneath all of it, resolve rooted deeper. Daniel and Clara thought I would vanish into silence. But I wasn't vanishing. I was beginning. And though I didn't yet know where the road would lead, I knew this with certainty. When it led me back to them, I would not be the same mother they thought they could discard. I would be someone they would never forget. The bus jolted to a stop. Passengers shuffled off. I tightened my grip on the scarf around my neck, inhaled the cold night air, and stepped into the unknown. The first step forward. Small, fragile, uncertain, but mine. The boarding house on 14th Street looked tired, as though the building itself had given up on hope years ago. The front steps sagged, the railing leaned, and a flickering bulb above the door hummed like it resented still being alive. I hesitated at the entrance. My palms were damp, my heart beat loud in my chest. What if he wasn't here? What if he was here, but he didn't remember me?
or worse, didn't want to remember me. Still, I stepped inside. The lobby was a narrow hallway lined with battered mailboxes, their locks broken, most hanging open. A man behind a scratched plexiglass window looked up at me with tired eyes. "Help you?" he muttered. "I'm looking for someone. Michael Rhodes, about 68, maybe 70, tall, or he used to be." The man scratched at his stubble, thinking, then he shrugged. "Room 3B, if he lets you in." 3B. My heart lurched. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight. The hallway stretched long and dim, doors lining either side, muffled sounds leaking through, TVs, coughing, laughter, arguments. When I reached 3B, my hand hovered over the door, trembling. What if I was too late? I knocked. Silence. Then slowly, the sound of shuffling steps inside. The door opened a crack, and there he was, Michael. Time had carved itself into him. His once broad shoulders stooped, his hair grayed, his skin weathered. His frame looked thinner, almost frail. But his eyes were the same. Dark, steady, piercing. The eyes that once saw me when no one else did. "Evelyn?" His voice was raspy, uncertain, but it carried recognition. I swallowed hard. "It's me." For a moment, he just stared. Then the door opened wider, and he stepped back to let me in. The room was small, cluttered with old books, pill bottles, and photographs stacked in messy piles. A thin blanket lay crumpled on the bed. He eased himself into a chair, wincing slightly as though every movement hurt. "You look—" He trailed off, searching for the word. "Old," I finished with a bitter laugh. "No," he said softly. "Beautiful. Just older. Like me." The years between us collapsed in that moment. My throat tightened. I wanted to reach for him, but I held back. "I shouldn't have found you sooner," I whispered. He shook his head. "Life doesn't work like that. We find each other when we're supposed to." He coughed, a deep, rattling sound that made me flinch. He waved it off. "Don't look at me like that. I'm still here." But the truth was clear. Michael was sick. His hands trembled slightly. His breath came shorter than it should. "Are you all right?" I asked carefully. "All right enough," he said, though his eyes betrayed the lie. "Doctors have their words for it. I have mine. I call it time catching up. And I'll tell you this, the woman they had created was not afraid. Not of hunger, not of loneliness, not of them. Because once you've been left with nothing, what else is there to fear?" I lifted my head higher. My steps grew firmer, my eyes sharper. The people around me began to look at me differently, as though they sensed the change, though they couldn't name it. That's the thing about transformation. It shows before you even speak. And though I didn't yet know how, I knew this with absolute certainty. Daniel and Clara would see me again. And when they did, they would not recognize the woman standing before them. The first step after betrayal is always the hardest. Not the crying, not the aching, not even the anger. No, the hardest step is moving, rising from the bench, gathering what's left of you, choosing to act. And that was the choice before me. I had spent days at the airport, hovering between despair and fury, between invisibility and awakening. The scarf around my neck carried Michael's memory like a lantern in the dark. But lanterns only glow so far. Eventually, you have to walk into the shadows yourself. I couldn't stay here forever. The airport, with its hollow announcements and restless crowds, was no place to rebuild. It was only a reminder of what had been taken. And I wanted more than reminders. I wanted reclamation. So I stood. I thought of Clara's indifference, Daniel's clipped voice. I thought of the years I had given them, the dreams I had shelved, the love I had poured. And then I thought of Michael, my first love, the only one who had ever made me feel like Evelyn, not just Mom. Where was he now? Was he alive? Did he remember me? The thought wouldn't let go. It circled in my mind like a song I couldn't silence, and with each turn, it grew louder, more insistent. Maybe the first step forward wasn't about Daniel and Clara at all. Maybe it was about me, about reclaiming the parts of myself I had lost long before they abandoned me. So, I made a choice. I would find him. It sounded foolish, even impossible. But wasn't survival always about chasing the impossible? I didn't know if Michael was still in the city or if life had scattered him like it had scattered me. But I knew this. I couldn't walk backwards, only forward. And Michael represented forward not because I wanted to live in the past, but because he had once shown me a glimpse of a future I'd never taken. Maybe destiny was offering me another chance. The bus rattled on, and I pressed my forehead against the glass, watching the city blur by. For the first time since the airport, my tears didn't feel like defeat. They felt like release. Was I still broken? Yes. Was I still betrayed? Yes. But I was moving. One step, then another. The struggle wasn't over. Hunger still gnawed. Fear still whispered. Anger still simmered. But beneath all of it, resolve rooted deeper. Daniel and Clara thought I would vanish into silence. But I wasn't vanishing. I was beginning. And though I didn't yet know where the road would lead, I knew this with certainty. When it led me back to them, I would not be the same mother they thought they could discard. I would be someone they would never forget. The bus jolted to a stop. Passengers shuffled off. I tightened my grip on the scarf around my neck, inhaled the cold night air, and stepped into the unknown. The first step forward. Small, fragile, uncertain, but mine. The boarding house on 14th Street looked tired, as though the building itself had given up on hope years ago. The front steps sagged, the railing leaned, and a flickering bulb above the door hummed like it resented still being alive. I hesitated at the entrance. My palms were damp, my heart beat loud in my chest. What if he wasn't here? What if he was here, but he didn't remember me, or worse, didn't want to remember me? Still, I stepped inside. The lobby was a narrow hallway lined with battered mailboxes, their locks broken, most hanging open. A man behind a scratched plexiglass window looked up at me with tired eyes. "Help you?" he muttered. "I'm looking for someone. Michael Rhodes, about 68, maybe 70, tall, or he used to be." The man scratched at his stubble, thinking, then he shrugged. "Room 3B, if he lets you in." 3B. My heart lurched. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight. The hallway stretched long and dim, doors lining either side, muffled sounds leaking through, TVs, coughing, laughter, arguments. When I reached 3B, my hand hovered over the door, trembling. What if I was too late? I knocked. Silence. Then slowly, the sound of shuffling steps inside. The door opened a crack, and there he was, Michael. time had carved itself into him. His once broad shoulders stooped, his hair grayed, his skin weathered. His frame looked thinner, almost frail. But his eyes were the same. Dark, steady, piercing. The eyes that once saw me when no one else did. "Evelyn?" His voice was raspy, uncertain, but it carried recognition. I swallowed hard. "It's me." For a moment, he just stared. Then the door opened wider, and he stepped back to let me in. The room was small, cluttered with old books, pill bottles, and photographs stacked in messy piles. A thin blanket lay crumpled on the bed. He eased himself into a chair, wincing slightly as though every movement hurt. "You look—" He trailed off, searching for the word. "Old," I finished with a bitter laugh. "No," he said softly. "Beautiful. Just older. Like me." The years between us collapsed in that moment. My throat tightened. I wanted to reach for him, but I held back. "I shouldn't have found you sooner," I whispered. He shook his head. "Life doesn't work like that. We find each other when we're supposed to." He coughed, a deep, rattling sound that made me flinch. He waved it off. "Don't look at me like that. I'm still here." But the truth was clear. Michael was sick. His hands trembled slightly. His breath came shorter than it should. "Are you all right?" I asked carefully. "All right enough," he said, though his eyes betrayed the lie. "Doctors have their words for it. I have mine. I call it time catching up."
Silence settled between us, heavy and fragile. I wanted to weep, to rage at the years lost, but instead, I reached across the small table and laid my hand over his. His skin was cool, his grip weak, but the spark, the connection, was still there. "I needed to see you," I said, "because everything else in my life, it's fallen apart. Daniel and Clara, my voice cracked. They left me at the airport with nothing. Like I was nothing." His jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. "They did what?" "They abandoned me," I whispered. "Stole from me. Threw me away." Michael's hand gripped mine tighter, surprising me with its sudden strength. "Then they don't deserve to call you mother." His voice was low, fierce, the fire of his younger self breaking through. "But listen to me, Evelyn. You are not nothing. You never were." Tears blurred my vision. "Why does it still hurt so much?" "Because you loved them," he said simply. "But love doesn't mean you let them destroy you. Sometimes the strongest love is the one that fights back." Michael's room was quiet, except for the faint hum of a heater in the corner. Outside, the city buzzed, horns blaring, footsteps rushing, life carrying on. But in here, it felt as though time had paused. Two old souls face to face after decades apart, bound by both memory and regret. I sat on the edge of the chair, my hands folded in my lap, studying him. He was thinner now, his breath uneven, his body clearly weary from illness. Yet beneath the frailty, there was still the same man who once made me laugh so hard I couldn't breathe, who once looked at me like I was the only woman alive. But seeing him like this broke something open in me. "You're sick," I said quietly. He gave a wry smile. "You always did say I was stubborn. The doctors gave me timelines, charts, warnings. I gave them a shrug. Still here, aren't I?" His attempt at humor didn't hide the truth. I could see the strain in his movements, the tightness in his jaw when he coughed, and it hurt, not just because of what he was enduring, but because I hadn't been there for any of it. "I should have stayed," I whispered before I could stop myself. Michael's eyes softened. "Don't do that, Evelyn." "But it's true," I pressed. "When I left you all those years ago, it wasn't because I wanted to. It was because my parents expected me to marry someone else, someone safe, someone with money. And when I did, I thought it was the right choice for my children's future. But look where it's led me. They abandoned me anyway." The thought of losing him again so soon after finding him tore at me. "I don't want to lose you," I admitted. "You won't," he said softly. "Not this time. Even if my body fails me, Evelyn, my love won't. That's the one thing time can't steal." I pressed my forehead to his hand, tears spilling freely. "Then we'll fight together for whatever time we have left. We'll fight." Michael nodded slowly, his eyes closing with fatigue. "Together." That night, as I left his room and stepped into the cold air, I felt both heavier and lighter. He was sick, yes. Our time might be limited, yes. But I wasn't alone anymore. The old wounds had been reopened, but from them, new strength had risen. Daniel and Clara thought they had ended me, but with Michael beside me, they hadn't ended anything. They had started something they would never forget. At night, I sat at the small wooden table in Michael's room, scribbling notes on scraps of paper, things I remembered about Daniel's workplace, Clara's boutique, the people they surrounded themselves with, the weaknesses they pretended didn't exist. Daniel's pride was his career. He boasted endlessly of deals closed, of numbers that only grew higher. But I remembered the late-night calls when he asked me for loans he never repaid, the credit cards he maxed out and hid from everyone else. If his colleagues knew the truth, that the man they saw as polished and successful was riddled with financial rot, it would eat at his reputation faster than flames through paper. Clara's pride, on the other hand, was image. Her curated posts, her expensive clothes, her perfectly filtered life. But beneath it, I knew her cruelty, her lies, the way she mocked those she trusted. If her mask slipped even once in front of the people who idolized her, she'd crumble. I had everything I needed, but I hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of calculation. Revenge isn't about swinging wildly. It's about precision. The knife doesn't wound deepest when it thrashes. It wounds deepest when it's placed exactly where it hurts most.
The trigger came one afternoon when I passed Daniel's office again. He was standing outside with colleagues, laughing too loudly, his arrogance filling the space like smoke. He glanced up and froze when he saw me watching. His laughter faltered. His colleagues followed his gaze, curious. In that moment, I realized he was already afraid. The whisper had already planted itself inside him. All I had to do was make it grow until it consumed him. I walked on without a word, but inside the decision was made. The storm would begin. That night, Michael was worse. He lay in bed, his breathing shallow, his skin pale. I sat beside him, wiping his forehead with a damp cloth. Fear clawed at me. "I don't have forever," he murmured, his voice almost a sigh. "But you do. Promise me you'll finish this, Evelyn. Promise me you won't let them walk free of what they did." I nodded, tears spilling. "I promise." "Good," he whispered, his eyes fluttering shut. "Then I can rest." In the days that followed, I set the pieces in motion, quietly, carefully. I wasn't reckless, I was deliberate. I gathered proof of Daniel's hidden debts, reaching out to old contacts, piecing together what he thought was long buried. I listened at Clara's boutique, noting every whisper of dissatisfaction from her coworkers, every story of her arrogance. I didn't need to fabricate anything. The truth itself was enough. The truth was always the sharpest weapon. Daniel had always been careless with money. When he was younger, he lived off my paychecks, burning through savings on cars he couldn't afford, nights out with friends who disappeared when the bills came. Later, when he landed his corporate job, he dressed himself in polish, suits that hid his debts, ties that covered the lies wrapped around his neck. But I remembered the truth. And the truth was, Daniel never stopped owing. From the thrift shop, I befriended a woman who once worked as an accountant's assistant at Daniel's firm. Over steaming cups of weak coffee, she told me things I already suspected. Daniel had skeletons hidden in numbers, credit cards maxed out, loans shuffled from one place to another. He had enemies at the office, too. Colleagues who envied his promotion, managers who doubted his perfect record. All I had to do was strike where the cracks were already forming. I chose a Wednesday morning when the lobby of his office bustled with employees arriving for the day. Daniel liked to hold court in the lobby, chatting too loudly, flashing his charm, pretending he was indispensable. I waited across the street, a folder clutched in my hands. Inside, photocopies of his unpaid debts, notes from people he owed, reminders of the money he once begged from me, money he never returned. When Daniel appeared, polished as ever, I stepped forward. "Daniel." He froze at the sound of my voice. For a moment, panic flickered in his eyes before he smoothed it away. "Mother," he said tightly, "this isn't the place." "Then maybe this is better." I raised the folder just enough for his colleagues nearby to notice. Conversations faltered, eyes turned. Daniel's face drained of color. "Stop," he hissed, his voice sharp. "Don't do this." But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply extended the folder to one of his coworkers standing nearby. "You should know the man you work with. He hides more than he shows." Gasps rippled. The coworker hesitated, then opened the folder. Pages spilled out, fluttering like wounded birds across the marble floor. Numbers, debts, proof. Daniel lunged to grab them, but it was too late. Too many eyes had seen. Too many whispers had begun. "What is this, Daniel?" one of his colleagues demanded. "Lies!" Daniel snapped, his voice cracking. "She's senile, doesn't know what she's saying." Senile. The word stung, but I stood taller. "Is it a lie?" I asked softly, my voice steady enough to cut through the whispers. His colleagues stared, some with shock, some with smug satisfaction. Daniel's mask was cracking, right here, in the temple of his pride. Security ushered me out, but I didn't fight them. My work was done. Clara worked at an upscale boutique, the kind of place where dresses cost more than a month's rent. Her colleagues admired her. Her bosses saw her as stylish, ambitious, reliable. But I knew her vanity. I knew her arrogance. And I knew her temper. All it would take was one moment, one crack, to show them who she really was. Through a friend I'd made at the thrift shop, I learned the boutique was hosting a weekend launch event. Socialites, influencers, the kind of crowd Clara lived to impress. The perfect stage. So I waited. The boutique glittered with lights that night, glass windows glowing like jewelry boxes. I stepped through the door. Conversations faltered, heads turned.
Clara's eyes locked on mine, her smile freezing mid-laugh. For the briefest moment, her mask slipped, her face drained of color. I didn't rush, I didn't shout. I simply walked toward her, each step steady, deliberate. "Mother," she hissed under her breath as I approached. "Why not?" I said softly, my voice carrying just enough. "Don't you want your friends to meet the woman you left at an airport with no money?" Gasps rippled. Clara's mask cracked wider. "Don't," she started, her voice sharp, but I didn't stop. I turned slightly, addressing the guests, my tone calm, almost conversational. "Did she tell you how she and her brother abandoned me? How she laughed when I sat alone, hungry, waiting for children who never came back?" The boutique fell silent. Cameras that once flashed for gowns now pointed at us. Clara's hands trembled. "You're ruining this for me." "No, Clara," I said, steady and clear. "You ruined this yourself. All I did was step into the light." Her boss approached, frowning. "Is this true, Clara?" Clara stammered, her voice faltering. "She's lying. She's bitter. She's just—" But her panic was visible. Her desperation showed. And the thing about glass worlds is that once the first crack appears, people stop seeing beauty. They see fragility. Her colleagues whispered. Some stepped back. Others exchanged looks. And Clara, for once, wasn't the center of admiration. She was the center of doubt. She tried to grab my arm, to push me toward the door, but I held her wrist lightly and leaned close enough that only she could hear. "You thought I would disappear? But now every room you walk into, you'll wonder if I'll be there, watching, reminding." Her eyes filled with tears, not from guilt, but from humiliation. I left before she could answer, the silence of the boutique heavy behind me. That night, I returned to Michael. He was lying down, weaker than I'd ever seen him, but when I told him what happened, his lips curled into a tired smile. "You didn't just break her mask, you shattered it."
I sat beside him, tears in my eyes. "But why doesn't it feel like enough?" "Because revenge isn't just about what you do to them," he said softly. "It's about what you reclaim for yourself. And you, Evelyn, you're reclaiming piece by piece. That's why it feels unfinished, because you're still rising." I held his hand until he drifted into sleep, his breathing shallow but peaceful. And as I sat in the dim light, I realized something. Daniel had been stripped. Clara had been shattered. For weeks, I had haunted Daniel and Clara separately. Cracks had formed in their perfect images. Daniel exposed at his office, Clara humiliated at her boutique. For the first time, Daniel and Clara looked small, not polished, not perfect, small. They had built their worlds on lies, but the truth had just been nailed to them publicly, and no polished tie or shimmering dress could cover it. Security didn't drag me out this time. They didn't dare. Instead, I left on my own, walking out of the hall with my head high, my footsteps echoing like thunder fading after lightning is struck. Michael was waiting for me. He sat in the passenger seat of a borrowed car, his figure thin against the leather, a blanket tucked around his legs. His face was pale, his lips tinged with blue, but when I opened the door, his smile spread slow and proud. "You did it," he whispered, his voice a rasp. I leaned in, pressed my forehead gently against his. "We did it." He chuckled weakly. "No, that was all you, Evelyn. You walked in there and made them small. I only sat here dreaming of the moment." I shook my head. "No, Michael, you were the fire. Every step I took, I carried you with me." He closed his eyes, and a tear slipped down his cheek.
For a moment, we sat there, the hum of the city around us, but the only sound I could hear was his uneven breath. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. Daniel and Clara didn't try to reach me, and I didn't expect them to. Their pride was broken, their masks shattered. But that was no longer my focus. Sit tight. Let me share with you where my focus was on now. Now my focus was Michael. His cough grew deeper. His strength faltered faster. Some mornings he couldn't rise without my help. I cooked soups he barely touched, sat beside him as he drifted in and out of shallow sleep. Every laugh, every story, every soft squeeze of his hand felt like it could be the last. And that terrified me more than anything Daniel or Clara could have done. Because I had lived without dignity before, but I couldn't imagine living without him again. That night, as I tucked him beneath his blanket and kissed his forehead, he whispered one last thing before sleep took him. Don't waste the time we have left on the past, Evelyn. The past is gone. Let's live in today. I sat awake long after, listening to his shallow breaths, holding his hand. The storm was over, yes, but another shadow was growing. And this time, I didn't know if I had the strength to fight it. That night, as I helped him into bed, he gripped my wrist tighter than usual. His breath rattled, his chest rising unevenly. "Evelyn," he said, voice raw, "I don't want you to be afraid when I go." Tears stung my eyes. "How can I not be afraid? You're all I have." "No," he whispered. "You have yourself. You found your strength again. Don't let my leaving take that away." I pressed my forehead to his. "I don't care about strength if it means losing you." He cupped my face weakly. "Then let's make a promise, a vow, not just to live together, but to face death together. No fear, no regret, just us. Like it always should have been." But at night, when he slept and the room was still, fear crept back in. I would watch his chest rise and fall, each breath uneven, and wonder, was this the night it would stop? Could I wake tomorrow and find the space beside me empty? That thought broke me. But then I would remember the vow. No fear, no regret, just us. And I would slip beneath the blanket, curl against him, and let his weak heartbeat steady my own. Michael was slipping away. I could see it in his eyes, feel it in his bones. But he was slipping away with dignity, with love. And that, I realized, was the one thing death could never take. The days grew shorter, and so did his strength. It started with little things. Michael couldn't finish his tea without setting the cup down halfway. He would lose his breath climbing the single flight of stairs to the apartment. His once steady hands trembled when he tried to button his shirt. But then the little things became big. One morning I found him on the floor, coughing so hard his body shook. I rushed to his side, holding him, my own tears mixing with the sweat on his forehead. He tried to smile, but the cough overtook him. "See?" he wheezed. "I'm not the man I used to be." I cupped his face. "You are more than the man you used to be. You're mine." And I helped him back to bed, though my own knees shook beneath his weight. Caring for Michael became my life. I measured his medicines, cooked soups he barely touched, changed his sheets when night sweats left them damp. I learned how to ease his breathing by propping pillows behind his back, how to steady his steps when he insisted on walking to the window to see the city lights. There were nights I sat awake, listening to him breathe, terrified that if I closed my eyes, I would wake to silence. But I never complained, because each task, each sacrifice felt like a gift, a chance to love him not in grand gestures, but in simple, sacred acts. Even as his body weakened, his spirit still fought to shine. One afternoon, he asked me to wheel him outside. We sat in the small courtyard, wrapped in blankets, watching children play. He pointed at a boy chasing a ball and whispered, "That was me once, running, laughing, thinking the world was endless." I rested my head on his shoulder. "It still is endless, Michael. For us, it always will be." He smiled faintly. Endless, but not eternal. The words struck deep, but I didn't argue. Instead, I squeezed his hand tighter, as if my grip could hold back time. Some nights, the fear broke through. I would sit by his bedside and whisper, "I can't lose you again, not after all these years." His eyes, dim with illness, but sharp with love, would meet mine. "You won't lose me." "Not really. When I go, I'll still be here. In your breath, in your steps, in your fight. You think love dies with the body? No, Evelyn. It lives longer than both of us." I cried, and he wiped my tears with trembling fingers. "Don't cry for what's ending. Smile for what we found again."
One evening, he grew restless, trying to rise from bed. "I need to stand," he insisted, his voice frail but determined. "Michael, please." "I need to," he interrupted, eyes burning with one last flicker of strength. So I helped him. He leaned heavily on me, his body trembling, but together we stood. For a moment, just a moment, he wrapped his arms around me like he had decades ago. "See," he whispered in my ear, "I can still hold you." And then his knees buckled, and I barely caught him before we both fell to the floor. I cradled him, sobbing, "You don't have to prove anything to me. You never did." But he only smiled weakly. "I wanted to remind you that I'll always be the man who loved you." The next days blurred together. His breaths became shorter. His words are fewer. Sometimes he drifted so far into sleep, I had to touch his chest to reassure myself his heart was still beating. Doctors spoke of treatments, but Michael refused. No more hospitals, no more tubes. Just here, with you, until the end. So I honored his wish, and every day I whispered our vow again. No fear, no regret, just us. I watched the man I loved fade, but I also watched something else rise. My own strength. Revenge had restored my dignity, but caring for Michael, standing by him in his decline, was teaching me the deeper truth that love, even when shadowed by death, was still the greatest power I had ever known. The air inside the apartment grew stiller with each passing day. It was as though time itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Michael's body was failing, but his spirit clung stubbornly to the present, as if love alone could stretch the days. His eyes, though tired, dimmed by pain, still lit up every time I entered the room. He would whisper, "Sit with me," and I always did. I read to him,
sang softly, held his hand through the longest nights. His grip grew weaker, but it was still his hand, still the one that had held mine beneath stars when we were young. One night, as rain tapped softly against the window, Michael stirred. His voice was barely a breath. "Evelyn, do you remember the first time we promised forever?" I nodded, tears already burning my eyes. "At the fair, you told me forever was easy as long as it was with me." He smiled faintly. I was right. Forever was easy. I shook my head, clutching his hand. It wasn't easy. Life tore us apart. We lost decades. But we found each other again. And that's enough. That's more than enough. His breathing faltered, and panic surged through me. "Don't go yet, please. Stay a little longer." He squeezed my hand gently. "I'll stay in every way that matters. When you walk, I'll be the step beside you. When you breathe, I'll be the air in your lungs. Love doesn't die. It just changes form." I sobbed openly, pressing my forehead to his. "I can't lose you again." "You won't," he whispered. "Not this time, because I'll never leave you. Not really." In the quiet hours before dawn, his breaths grew shallow, spaced further apart. I lay beside him, holding his frail body against mine, whispering our vow over and over. No fear, no regret, just us. His lips formed the words one last time, though no sound came. His eyes found mine, soft and unbroken, and then slowly closed. And just like that, the silence came. But it wasn't empty. It was full of every laugh we'd shared, every kiss, every vow, full of the storm we had weathered and the love we had reclaimed. I wept until the sky lightened, my tears soaking his shirt, my arms refusing to let go. But even through the grief, I felt him, in the room, in me, forever.
The funeral was small, quiet, just the way he would have wanted. A few old friends, some neighbors who had watched us dance in the courtyard. I spoke briefly, my voice trembling but clear. "He was the love I found twice in one lifetime," I said, "and I will carry him for the rest of my days." When it was over, I returned home alone. The apartment was unbearably quiet, but instead of despair, I felt something steadier, something Michael had left with me. Peace. He was gone, yes, but so much of him remained. Do you know what strength really is? It's not standing tall when life is kind. It's not the applause of others or the weight of money in your hand. Strength is rising when you've been broken. Strength is speaking when silence was supposed to bury you. Strength is holding the hand of the dying and saying, "I will not run." Daniel and Clara thought strength was power, but they were wrong. Strength is love that endures. And that, my dears, is something they may never understand. I am Evelyn Carter, a mother betrayed, a woman restored, a lover reunited. And though the world tried to write me off, I am still here, still standing, still speaking, still loving. Have you ever been left behind? By family, by friends, by someone you thought would stand by you until the end? Did it break you? Did it make you feel invisible, as though your pain didn't matter to anyone? I know that weight. I lived it, And I want to tell you, you are not alone. Don't let betrayal be the last word in your story. Don't let the ones who hurt you write your ending. You have a voice. You have a strength you may not even see yet. And you have the right to rise. Some of you listening have lost your Michaels, a partner, a friend, a soulmate who made you feel whole. Do you still feel their presence? Do you still hear their laughter in quiet rooms? Still catch yourself turning to share a moment only to remember they're gone? That's love. That's proof that what you had was real and that it will never truly leave you. So here is what I ask of you. Don't let this story stay on the screen. Carry it into your life. If it touched you, share it with a friend, with your children, with someone who needs to hear that they are not finished yet. Tell me your story. Tell me about the betrayals you've survived, the loves you've held onto, the strength you've found in the darkest nights. Because stories aren't meant to stay hidden. They're meant to be told, to connect us, to remind us that we're never truly alone. I'll leave you with this. If destiny handed you both heartbreak and healing, both betrayal and love, would you let the heartbreak define you, or would you choose the love that endures even when everything else falls away? What part of the world are you watching this from? If any part of this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and like the video.